At 2:27 in the morning, my mother called and told me my husband had beaten her with a baseball bat. I was walking across the employee lot outside Fort Cavazos, still wearing my uniform with my travel mug in one hand and my car keys in the other. The July air was already warm and the parking lot lights made everything look flat and gray. My phone rang just as I reached my Ford Explorer. It was Mom. She never called that late, not even when Dad died. Mom? For several seconds all I heard was breathing. Then a small broken sound came through the phone. Emily. My hand tightened around the keys. Where are you? The police station. I set my coffee on the hood. Why are you at the police station? She tried to answer, but she was crying too hard. My mother, Margaret Ellis, was 71 years old and stubborn enough to argue with a thunderstorm. I had seen her bury her husband recover from knee surgery and chase a raccoon off her porch with a broom. I had never heard her sound afraid. Take your time, I said. Tell me what happened. Ryan came over. My stomach dropped. My husband had told me he was spending the evening reviewing invoices at his remodeling office in Temple. He had even texted me around 11 complaining about a supplier and asking whether I had remembered to pay the electric bill. What did he want? He was angry. He said I'd been turning you against him. She drew in a shaky breath. I told him you didn't need my help seeing what kind of man he'd become. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like something Mom would say. Direct, plain, and impossible to misunderstand. He called me a crazy old woman, she whispered. Then he hit me with a baseball bat. For 1 second I couldn't move. The night shift workers passed behind me laughing about breakfast at Whataburger. Somewhere near the gate, a diesel engine started. The ordinary sounds made Mom's words feel even worse. Where did he hit you? My shoulder, my side. I fell near the kitchen table. Have you seen a doctor? No, they brought me here. Who brought you? The police. That answer stopped me cold. Mom lowered her voice. Ryan told them I attacked him. He said I'm confused and mentally unstable. They believe him, Emily. I opened the driver's door and climbed in. Listen to me. Don't sign anything. Don't argue with anybody. Ask for medical attention and stay where other people can see you. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For causing trouble between you and your husband. That hurt more than I expected. You didn't cause this, I said. Ryan did. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:29. The Killeen Police Department was close, but every red light felt personal. I called my supervisor, told him there was a family emergency, and drove with both hands locked around the wheel. 18 minutes later, I pushed through the glass doors of the station. The room went quiet. The desk sergeant looked up, recognized me, and slowly rose from his chair. His face lost its color. Ma'am, he said, glancing toward the back hallway. Please, let me explain. The desk sergeant introduced himself as Mark Dalton, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with silver hair and tired eyes. His nameplate sat perfectly straight on his uniform, but his hands weren't nearly as steady. Mrs. Walker, he said quietly, would you come with me? I'll come with you after I see my mother. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. She requested medical attention, he said. EMS looked at her. She's bruised, but she's conscious. Where is she? In interview room 3. I walked past him without waiting for permission. Mom looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. She was sitting in a plastic chair, clutching an ice pack against her left shoulder. Her white blouse had dried blood near the collar, and her reading glasses were bent. One lens was missing completely. When she saw me, she tried to smile. I knew you'd come. I knelt beside her. You're okay. I've been better. I gently brushed a loose strand of gray hair away from her face. You need x-rays, they said after they're done asking questions. I looked back toward the hallway. No, you're getting medical care first. One of the younger officers standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. We were just following procedure, ma'am. I kept my voice calm. My mother is 71 years old and was struck with a baseball bat. Procedure says she gets medical treatment. He looked embarrassed. Yes, ma'am. Within minutes, an ambulance crew returned. As they helped Mom onto a stretcher, she squeezed my hand. Don't lose your temper. I almost laughed. I don't have one left. She knew that wasn't true. I'd spent 24 years in the Army learning exactly how to stay calm when every instinct told me not to. After they left, Sergeant Dalton invited me into his office. I owe you an apology. You owe my mother one. Yes. He didn't argue. That surprised me. He sat down across from me. Your husband called 911 himself. I figured. He reported that your mother attacked him with a fireplace poker. My mother doesn't even own a fireplace. Dalton blinked. What? She lives in a ranch house outside Temple. Electric heat, no chimney, no fireplace. He slowly leaned back. I didn't know that. Did anyone check? Silence. That told me enough. Ryan had always been good with first impressions. When I met him 15 years earlier, he was the funniest man in the room. He volunteered with Habitat for Humanity on weekends, coached, Little League remembered birthdays, and somehow convinced everyone he met that he'd known them for years. People trusted Ryan. I had. Back then, I was a newly promoted captain trying to balance military life with raising a toddler after my first marriage ended. Ryan made everything feel easy. He'd bring dinner to the house when I worked late. He built Lily a treehouse with his own hands. He called my mother every Mother's Day. For years, I believed I'd found one of the good ones. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. He'd always needed to be admired. If someone questioned him, he couldn't let it go. At first, it looked harmless. Correcting waiters, arguing with cashiers, insisting neighbors were jealous. Then it became me. He didn't like that I outranked most civilians in crisis situations. He joked that I treated our house like another military base. When his remodeling business slowed after interest rates climbed, the jokes became insults. You think those medals make you smarter than everybody else? No, I'd answer. They're just reminders that I finish hard things. He hated that response because it was true. Sergeant Dalton folded his hands. Mrs. Walker. Emily. Emily, there's something else you should know. He slid a small evidence bag across the desk. Inside was my mother's broken eyeglass lens. It was found under your husband's boot. I stared at it for several seconds. Ryan had claimed Mom attacked him, but somehow he'd managed to step on her glasses. That wasn't the mistake of a victim. That was the mistake of someone standing over another person. And for the first time that night, I stopped wondering whether my marriage could be saved. I started wondering how many lies it would take to bury the truth. By sunrise, my mother was settled into a room at Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Temple. She had a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, deep bruising across her left side, and a concussion. The emergency room doctor told me she was lucky the bat hadn't connected with her head. Lucky? It was a strange word to use for someone who'd been beaten inside her own kitchen. Lily was still asleep at home when I called my younger sister Karen and asked her to pick my daughter up before Ryan could get there. Emily, Karen said, "What's going on?" "I'll explain later. Just promise me Ryan won't get anywhere near Lily. You have my word." That was enough. Around 8 that morning, Detective Angela Ruiz introduced herself outside Mom's hospital room. She looked to be in her early 40s, dressed in plain clothes instead of a uniform with a legal pad tucked under one arm. "I'd like to hear your mother's version," she said. "So would I." Ruiz gave me a tired smile. "Last night moved fast, too fast. She wasn't making excuses, I respected that. Mom insisted she was ready to talk." Ruiz switched on a small recorder. "Mrs. Ellis, can you tell me what happened from the beginning?" Mom nodded. "It was around 9:30. Ryan knocked on my door carrying a pie from Miller's Bakery. I frowned. That sounds like Ryan. He smiled and said he'd come to apologize. I almost didn't let him in. "Why did you—" "Because your father always told me to hear people out." She looked down at her hands. "I suppose Harold would have also told me to trust my instincts." Ruiz encouraged her to continue. Ryan sat at my kitchen table. We talked for a few minutes. Then he asked whether I'd been telling Emily to leave him. "What did you say?" "I told him Emily makes her own decisions." Mom paused. "I also told him that lately he'd become angry all the time." Ruiz scribbled a note. "What happened then?" He stood up. Mom swallowed hard. "He started pacing. Said I was poisoning his family. Said I thought I was better than him because my daughter wore a uniform." I looked toward the window. That sounded painfully familiar. He called me— Mom stopped. Ruiz waited. A crazy old woman. Silence settled over the room. I told him I wasn't afraid of him. She laughed once. A foolish thing to say looking back. "No," I said quietly. It was the truth. Mom reached for the paper cup on her bedside table. My kitchen door was open because I'd been watering tomatoes. Ruiz looked up. "You remember that?" "Oh yes." "What happened next?" He walked outside. "For how long?" "Maybe 30 seconds. And then," he came back carrying a baseball bat. Every muscle in my body tightened. "He said," Mom whispered, "maybe people will believe you really are crazy after this." Ruiz stopped writing. "You're certain those were his words?" Mom nodded. "He swung once." She touched her shoulder. I fell against the kitchen table. "Did he continue?" "Yes." The second hit caught my ribs. Ruiz looked sick. Did you lose consciousness? For a moment. When I opened my eyes, Ryan was standing over me with his cell phone. What was he doing? He was dialing 911. Mom stared at the blanket covering her legs. I remember thinking, thank goodness. Then tears filled her eyes. I didn't realize he was calling to report me. The room fell silent. Ruiz slowly closed her notebook. Mrs. Ellis? Yes, I believe you. For the first time since that awful phone call, I saw a little of the weight lift from my mother's shoulders. But outside the hospital, Ryan was already telling neighbors a very different story. By lunchtime, people were whispering that my elderly mother had suffered another mental episode. And somehow, my husband was being called the victim. By early afternoon, Ryan's version of the story had spread through half of Bell County. One neighbor posted on Facebook that my mother had finally snapped. Another wrote that Ryan had always been a patient, caring husband. Someone even commented, poor guy. First his mother-in-law loses her mind, now his wife has to deal with it. I stared at my phone for almost a minute before locking the screen. 24 years in the Army had taught me something important. You don't fight rumors online. You fight them with facts. Detective Ruiz called just after 2. I'd like you to come back to the station. Did something happen? Yes. Her voice sounded different. Careful. Hopeful. I think we found our first problem with your husband's statement. 40 minutes later, I parked outside the Killeen Police Department again. This time, no one stared. No one whispered. Instead, Officer Ben Carter, the young patrol officer I'd seen the night before, met me near the entrance. He looked embarrassed. Mrs. Walker. Emily. He nodded. Emily, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I do. He rubbed the back of his neck. I should have slowed things down last night. You believed the first story you heard. I did. And now, he looked toward the interview rooms. Now I think we missed something. That was enough honesty for me. Inside, Detective Ruiz spread several photographs across the conference table. Walk me through these. The first picture showed my mother's kitchen. A broken chair. Blood droplets near the refrigerator. The second showed the baseball bat. The third made me stop. Ryan's right boot. There were tiny pieces of glass stuck in the sole. My mother's glasses. Ruiz nodded. The crime scene technician matched the fragments. I looked up. If Mom attacked Ryan, why was he standing on her glasses? Exactly. Ruiz pointed to another photograph. Notice the blood pattern. I leaned closer. Most of it was low to the floor. Not chest high. Not standing height. Kneeling height. Ruiz folded her arms. If two adults fight each other, blood usually tells a different story. I understood immediately. Mom hadn't been chasing Ryan around the kitchen. She'd been on the ground. Ryan had been standing over her, just like she'd described. Before I could speak, Officer Carter entered carrying 2 styrofoam coffee cups. He set one beside me. Figured you hadn't slept. I haven't. He hesitated. I also checked something after my shift. Ruiz looked at him. The 911 recording. What about it? When Ryan called, he sounded calm. So, my wife used to work dispatch. He shrugged. People who've just defended themselves usually sound scared. And Ryan, he sounded prepared. Prepared. That word stayed with me. Ryan hadn't sounded panicked. He hadn't stumbled over his words. He'd calmly built a story, almost as if he'd rehearsed it before dialing. Ruiz reached for another folder. We also spoke to 2 neighbors. What did they say? They heard yelling. I nodded. And they only heard one voice shouting. I already knew whose voice that had been. Ryan's temper always got louder before it got quieter. Ruiz looked directly at me. Emily, there's something else. She slid a printed report across the table. Your husband told responding officers he suffered injuries defending himself. I skimmed the report. Minor scratch. Redness on one wrist. Small cut on his thumb. Then I looked at the attached photographs. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I stared at Ryan's right hand. Then at the baseball bat. Then back at Detective Ruiz. Has anyone checked whether those injuries happened before or after the attack? The room went completely still. Ruiz slowly looked toward Officer Carter. He whispered exactly what I was thinking. Oh, neither of them had considered that possibility. Until now. That single question changed everything. Detective Ruiz immediately called the crime scene unit and asked the forensic nurse to re-examine Ryan's injuries. While she was on the phone, Officer Carter excused himself and hurried out of the room. I sat there staring at the photographs. Ryan always thought he was the smartest person in the room. That had been one of the things I admired when we first met. He could walk into a crowded restaurant and leave with 3 new friends. He remembered names, birthdays, and little details that made people feel important. Somewhere along the way, confidence had turned into arrogance. He stopped believing he could make mistakes. About 20 minutes later, Carter came back carrying a tablet. "I think you need to see this." Ruiz looked up. "What is it?" "The city traffic department." He placed the tablet on the conference table and tapped the screen. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. A quiet residential street. My mother's mailbox, part of her driveway. A grainy timestamp. Ruiz frowned. "I thought there weren't any cameras on that road." "There aren't any home security cameras that caught the assault," Carter replied. "But Bell County has a traffic monitoring camera about half a block away because of the construction detour." My pulse quickened. "Can it see Mom's house?" "Not directly." He zoomed in. "But it sees every vehicle that entered and left the street." The video started. At 9:28 p.m., Ryan's black F-150 turned onto Mom's road. He parked in her driveway. Nothing unusual. Then the timestamp rolled forward. No other vehicles arrived. No one else visited. At 10:11 p.m., an ambulance appeared. Seconds later, a patrol unit. Another patrol unit followed. Finally, at 10:47 p.m., Ryan's truck left. Ruiz leaned back. "So he never left during that entire period?" "No." She looked at me. "Why does that matter?" "Because Ryan told officers he walked outside after my mother attacked him." Ruiz nodded. "He claimed he stayed outside waiting for police." "Exactly." I pointed at the screen. "If he stayed outside, someone would have seen him." Officer Carter smiled. But nobody did. For the first time all day, I felt the smallest crack appear in Ryan's story. Not enough to break it. Just enough to let some light through. Then Carter swiped to another video. This one comes from a city utility truck. I looked closer. The truck had been parked near the intersection while crews repaired a damaged streetlight. The camera wasn't pointed at Mom's front door. It was pointed toward the street. Still, you could clearly see Ryan walking back to his truck, then opening the toolbox mounted in the truck bed. Then reaching inside, he pulled something long out of it. The picture wasn't sharp enough to identify the object, but we all knew what it probably was. Ruiz exhaled slowly. "He told responding officers the baseball bat belonged to your mother." I shook my head. "My mother hasn't owned a baseball bat in 30 years. And this," she pointed at the screen, "suggests he brought one." Before anyone spoke again, my phone buzzed. It was Lily. I stepped into the hallway before answering. "Hey, sweetheart." Her voice was quiet. "Mom, what is it?" Dad called. My heart sank. "What did he say?" "He asked if I still loved him." I closed my eyes. "And then, he said Grandma's been sick for a long time." I leaned against the wall. "He said people sometimes imagine things." She stopped. Then, in a trembling voice, she asked the question I had been dreading. "Mom, is Dad lying to me?" I didn't answer right away, because for the first time in 15 years, I realized my daughter already knew the truth. She just needed someone brave enough to say it out loud. I didn't answer Lily's question right away. Not because I didn't know the truth, because once I said the words out loud, there was no putting them back. I leaned against the hallway wall outside Detective Ruiz's office and took a slow breath. "Lily." "Yeah." "Your dad lied." Silence. Then I heard my daughter sniffle. "I knew it." "You did?" He kept saying the same thing over and over, that Grandma was confused, that everyone would understand someday. She paused. "But he never asked if she was okay." That hit me harder than anything else she'd said. Kids notice things adults miss. Ryan hadn't asked about Margaret's injuries because deep down he already knew exactly what they were. "Lily," I said gently, "I need you to stay with Aunt Karen for a little while longer." "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart." "What about you?" I looked through the glass window into Detective Ruiz's office. Officers were studying photographs spread across the conference table. "I'm going to be okay." "You promise?" "I promise." After we hung up, I stood there for another minute before going back inside. Ruiz looked up. "Everything okay?" "My daughter." She nodded. "How's she holding up?" "Better than I expected." I wished I could say the same about myself. That afternoon, Detective Ruiz obtained a search warrant for Ryan's business records. His company, Walker Custom Remodeling, wasn't exactly large. 6 employees, 3 trucks, mostly kitchen remodels, roofing jobs, and insurance repairs around Bell County. On paper, it looked healthy. Reality told a different story. By 5 o'clock, Ruiz called me again. "Emily, can you come back?" "I just left." I know. Did you find something? We found several somethings. When I arrived, Ruiz handed me a stack of printed bank statements. I recognize these accounts. They're all in your husband's name. I flipped through the pages. Then I stopped. Large transfers. Thousands of dollars. Sometimes 10,000. Sometimes 20. Always withdrawn in cash. Where did this money go? We don't know. She slid another document across the desk. A notice from the IRS. Unpaid payroll taxes. Another. Past due business loan payments. Another. A second mortgage on our house. I stared at the paper. There has to be some mistake. Ruiz shook her head. The paperwork is legitimate. No, I whispered. He would have told me, wouldn't he? Then I remembered every conversation we'd had over the past year. Every time I asked how business was going. Every time Ryan smiled and said, busy as ever. Every time he laughed off another overdue bill. Every time he insisted everything was under control. Nothing had been under control. He'd simply stopped telling me the truth. Ruiz folded her hands. We think your husband was under serious financial pressure. Enough to assault an elderly woman. We're still figuring that out. I rubbed my forehead. So am I. Before she could respond, Officer Carter knocked on the open door. Detective, what is it? The forensic report just came back. Ruiz took the envelope. She read the first page, then the second. Finally, she looked at me. The scratches on Ryan's hands? What about them? They weren't defensive wounds. I felt my stomach tighten. The medical examiner believes they happened after the assault. I frowned. He likely cut himself while handling the broken eyeglasses. For a moment, nobody spoke. Ryan hadn't just lied. He'd injured himself afterward to make his story believable. Ruiz slowly closed the file. Emily, yeah, I've investigated domestic violence cases for 15 years. She looked me straight in the eyes. I've seen people lie. I've seen people manipulate. But I've rarely seen someone plan this far ahead. Neither had I. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I hadn't been living with an angry husband. I'd been living with a man who had quietly become dangerous. 3 days later, Ryan asked to see Lily. Not me. Not his lawyer. Not Detective Ruiz. Just Lily. The request came through his attorney, who insisted Ryan wanted a private father-daughter conversation. Detective Ruiz immediately objected. So do I said. Ruiz looked at me across her desk. Legally, unless he's arrested or a judge says otherwise, he still has parental rights. I hated hearing that. So what are my options? You supervise the visit. That's it? For now, I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. Every mile gave me another reason to cancel the visit. Every mile reminded me Lily deserved the chance to see the truth for herself. The meeting took place at Karen's house that Saturday afternoon. Ryan arrived exactly on time. He looked exhausted. His beard hadn't been trimmed. His shirt was wrinkled. But if someone had passed him in the grocery store, they would have thought he was just another tired father. He smiled the moment he saw Lily. Hey, Peanut. She didn't run to him. She just stood beside me. That tiny hesitation told me more than words ever could. Ryan noticed it too. You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not. Then why are you standing over there? Lily looked down at the porch floor. I don't know. Ryan forced a laugh. You've been listening to grown-up problems. I stepped between them. You have 1 hour. He nodded. I just want to talk. Karen stayed in the kitchen. I sat on the back patio where I could see them through the sliding glass door. Neither of them knew something else. Detective Ruiz had advised me to record the visit. Texas law allowed it because I was part of the conversation before stepping away, and Lily was a minor under my care. More importantly, I wanted an accurate record, not rumors or guesses of what was said. The small recorder rested inside my purse on the patio table. At first, Ryan sounded exactly like himself. Gentle, funny, easygoing. He asked about school. Basketball practice. Her favorite science teacher. Then the conversation shifted. Lily. Yeah. You know Grandma's been confused lately. Silence. You've noticed that, right? I don't think so. Ryan leaned forward. I know this is hard. Another pause. But sometimes older people imagine things. Lily quietly stirred the ice in her lemonade. Then she asked the question neither of us expected. If Grandma imagined it, why does she have broken ribs? Ryan froze. Even from 20 feet away I could see it. He hadn't prepared for that. He smiled again. They made a mistake. The doctors, they don't know everything. Lily looked at him for several seconds. Then she spoke so softly I almost missed it. "Did you hit Grandma?" Ryan rubbed both hands together. "I had to protect myself." "From Grandma." He didn't answer. Instead, he sighed. "You don't understand." "Then explain." Ryan glanced toward the patio. Toward me, then back at Lily. I needed people to believe she wasn't thinking clearly. My heart stopped. Lily frowned. "Why?" "Because she would have ruined everything." "What everything?" Ryan shook his head. "You'll understand when you're older." "No." She looked him straight in the eye. "I understand now." Ryan reached toward her. She stood up before he could touch her. "I don't want to talk anymore." She walked straight past him, straight to me. Without saying a word, she wrapped both arms around my waist. Ryan remained seated for nearly a full minute. Then he quietly buried his face in his hands. He had no idea. Every word he'd just spoken had been recorded. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he'd admitted exactly what Detective Ruiz had been trying to prove. Ryan's attorney called the recording taken out of context. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly the story around town began to change. People who had spent a week defending Ryan suddenly stopped posting about him. Church friends who had shared prayers for an innocent husband quietly deleted their comments. The silence said more than the accusations ever had. Still, none of that mattered. The only place that counted now was Bell County District Court. The trial began 6 weeks later. It wasn't one of those television courtrooms with dramatic speeches and constant objections. It was quieter than that, more uncomfortable, the kind of room where every cough echoed. I sat beside Detective Ruiz while the prosecutor organized his files. Across the aisle, Ryan wore a navy suit I'd bought him for my Army retirement banquet that never happened. He looked clean-shaven, calm. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was just another businessman caught in a misunderstanding. He glanced toward me once. I didn't look back. The prosecution started with my mother's testimony. Margaret walked slowly to the witness stand, her left shoulder still stiff. She told the jury exactly what happened. No exaggeration, no tears, just facts. "He called me a crazy old woman." She paused. Then he hit me. Ryan's attorney stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Ellis." "Yes?" "You've had a concussion before, haven't you?" "I fell off a ladder 8 years ago, so your memory isn't perfect." "My memory is good enough to remember who hit me." A few jurors exchanged glances. The attorney smiled politely. No further questions. Next came Officer Ben Carter. He admitted something most witnesses try to avoid. "I made a mistake." The courtroom became very quiet. I believed Mr. Walker before I gathered all the evidence. The prosecutor asked why. Because his story sounded believable. And today, I don't believe it anymore. That simple answer carried more weight than an hour of arguing. Then Detective Ruiz took the stand. One by one, she presented the evidence. Photographs, medical reports, bank records, the utility truck video, the traffic camera timeline, Ryan's financial problems. Finally, the recording from Karen's backyard. The judge allowed it. Ryan's attorney objected. Lost. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Ryan's own voice filled the room. I needed people to believe she wasn't thinking clearly. Nobody moved, because she would have ruined everything. I looked toward the jury. Every single person was watching Ryan. Not me. Not my mother. Ryan. For the first time since this began, he couldn't charm his way out of the truth. The prosecutor stood. "Mr. Walker, would you like to explain what you meant?" Ryan adjusted his tie. "I was talking about family conflict." "So you weren't referring to making Mrs. Ellis appear mentally unstable?" "No." The prosecutor picked up another file. "Interesting." He walked to the evidence table. Because 3 days before the assault, he held up a document. "You searched online for how reliable are witness statements from dementia patients." Ryan didn't answer. The prosecutor continued. "And 2 days before the assault?" Another paper. "You searched can head injuries cause memory loss?" The room felt colder. Then came the final blow. "Mr. Walker," the prosecutor placed a bank statement on the screen. "The morning after your mother-in-law was hospitalized, you transferred $86,000 from a hidden business account to an offshore investment account." Ryan stared at the screen. He didn't even try to explain. For the first time in 15 years, I saw fear in my husband's eyes. Real fear. Not because he'd been caught lying. Because he finally understood. Everyone else knew it too. The courtroom stayed silent after the prosecutor finished. Ryan looked toward his attorney, hoping for another objection, Another delay. Something to interrupt the momentum. There was nothing. His attorney simply leaned over and whispered something I couldn't hear. Ryan nodded once. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked like a man who understood he wasn't in control anymore. The defense tried anyway. They argued Ryan had been overwhelmed by financial stress, that he feared losing his business, that his marriage had fallen apart because my military career kept me away from home. They even suggested my mother had provoked an emotional confrontation. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. He simply stood. No amount of financial pressure gives someone permission to assault a 71-year-old woman. He let those words hang in the air. This case isn't about losing money. It's about a man who believed he could rewrite reality. The jurors never looked away from Ryan. Closing arguments ended shortly before lunch. The jury left to deliberate. Waiting turned out to be harder than the trial itself. Mom sat beside me in the hallway, slowly stirring a cup of coffee she never drank. "You should eat something," I said. She smiled faintly. "So should you." Neither of us moved. Officer Ben Carter walked over a few minutes later. He looked uncomfortable. "I've been wanting to tell you something." I looked up. "What is it?" "The night this happened." He hesitated. "I almost asked another officer to photograph your mother's injuries before we questioned her." "What changed your mind?" I let myself believe the easier story. He lowered his head. "I won't make that mistake again." I reached over and shook his hand. "Neither of us can change that night." "No, but we can learn from it." He nodded once before walking away. Mom watched him disappear around the corner. "Good man." "He is." "He'll remember this case for the rest of his career." "I think we all will." 3 hours later, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "We have a verdict." Everyone stood. Ryan kept his eyes on the defense table. The foreperson rose, on the charge of aggravated assault. "Guilty." Ryan closed his eyes. "On the charge of filing a false police report." "Guilty." "On the charge of witness tampering." "Guilty." "On the financial crimes uncovered during the investigation." "Guilty." The judge thanked the jurors before scheduling sentencing. Ryan didn't look at me. Not once. Deputies walked to his side. They placed handcuffs around his wrists. Only then did he finally turn. "Emily." It was the first time he'd spoken my name in weeks. I met his eyes. "What?" I never wanted it to end like this. I thought about my mother's broken ribs, about Lily crying herself to sleep, about months of lies. "You had hundreds of chances to stop," I said quietly. "You just never took one." The deputies led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited on the courthouse steps. Microphones appeared from every direction. One reporter asked the question everyone seemed to want answered. "Mrs. Walker, do you feel like you got revenge today?" I looked over at my mother. She was standing on her own. Her shoulder was healing. Lily was beside her holding her grandmother's hand. I looked back at the reporter. "No." I smiled gently. "I got the truth. And after everything we'd lived through, that was worth far more than revenge." Ryan was sentenced 6 weeks later. The judge gave him 8 years in state prison for aggravated assault, filing a false police report, witness tampering, and several financial crimes that surfaced during the investigation. Walker Custom Remodeling folded within 2 months. Vendors sued. His trucks were repossessed. The house we'd once planned to retire in was sold to satisfy debts I never knew existed. When the paperwork was finally signed, I drove home alone. For the first time in months, there wasn't a court hearing on my calendar. No detective waiting to call. No attorney asking another question. Just quiet. It felt strange. I spent the next few weekends helping my mother fix the little things around her house. We replaced the broken kitchen table. Lily insisted on picking out new curtains. Mom laughed when my daughter chose bright blue ones. I was thinking something beige. Lily grinned. "Grandma, beige is for people who quit." Mom looked at me and smiled. "She gets that from you." "No," I said. "She gets that from both of us." It was the first real laugh we'd shared in a long time. A month later, the Killeen Police Department invited my mother and me back. Not for another interview. For an apology. Chief Daniel Harper met us in the lobby himself. "I appreciate you coming." Mom smiled politely. "We weren't sure we should." "I understand." He led us into a small conference room where Sergeant Mark Dalton and Officer Ben Carter were already waiting. Dalton stood the moment we entered. "Mrs. Ellis." He looked directly at my mother. "I failed you that night." Mom didn't answer. I should have slowed down. I should have questioned the evidence instead of accepting the first explanation I heard. He took a slow breath. "I'm truly sorry." Officer Carter spoke next. I've attended additional training on elder abuse investigations. He looked embarrassed. I requested it. Mom reached over and patted his hand. Then something good came from all this. Nobody in the room spoke for several seconds. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't sound dramatic. Sometimes it's just an elderly woman choosing not to carry one more burden. Life settled into a new rhythm. I retired from the Army the following spring after 25 years of service. People often asked whether I missed wearing the uniform. Sometimes I did. Mostly I missed the people. But retirement gave me something I'd been missing for years. Time. Time to have coffee with Mom on Tuesday mornings. Time to watch every one of Lily's basketball games. Time to sit on the back porch at sunset without checking my phone every few minutes. One evening, Lily looked over while we were planting tomatoes in Grandma's garden. Mom, yeah. Do you hate Dad? I set my gardening gloves on the porch rail. No. She looked surprised. Really? I hate what he chose to do. That's different. It is. She thought about that for a moment before nodding. I think I understand. I hoped she truly did. Because carrying hate would have meant Ryan still had a place in our lives. He didn't. The truth had already taken that away from him. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that real justice isn't about watching someone fall. It's about refusing to let their choices define the rest of your life. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is keep moving forward with the people who never stopped loving us. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If it reminded you that truth, patience, and courage still matter, I hope you'll join me again for another story. Until then, take good care of yourself and the people who stand by you when life gets hard. The end.